There was a flood of good music in 2024, even deep in the fourth quarter, and we were getting that flood of great music in rock, alternative metal, and it was just so rewarding this year to keep up with new music as opposed to specific years in the past because the payoff was worth it. Limiting this list to 10 was difficult, and it's a good problem to have. There was a lot of variety with new and old bands bringing great stuff to the music world. There were also some impressive comebacks, albums from bands that haven't released anything in years returning with something huge. So, this is my attempt to rank what I thought were the best albums of 2024. Rules for the list: no live albums, cover albums, parody albums, or EPs. This rule is just to help narrow down the massive amount of good music in the playing field. This list is covering rock, metal, alternative, indie, punk, etc. If you're looking for country or hip-hop or something, why did you click on this channel in the first place? I have not heard every album this year. No one has. So if there is something you've loved not on this list, leave a comment below and tell people why. Tell people about what you love. If you're here to just complain though and say I'm wrong, make sure to write a 5-paragraph essay about it. That way I'll make sure to know how to respond to you and how serious you are. I promise I will respond to every 5-paragraph essay. Before we get to the top 10, here are a few honorable mentions. Bring Me the Horizon, Post-Human Next Gen. After a long wait for the follow-up survival horror, Bring Me the Horizon presented a ton of different ideas filled with more collaborations and styles, and somehow almost all of it worked. Even with Jordan Fish no longer connected and the band ready to go on break, I can still say Next Gen delivered. Powerwolf, Wake Up the Wicked. My favorite Powerwolf album in years, and one that had several extremely strong singles. With Powerwolf, you know what you're getting with the over-the-top power metal anthems, but with Wake Up the Wicked, it feels like a bit invigorated and varied. 10th album from the Werewolf Cult, and the band is still going strong. High on Fire, Cometh the Storm. The return of one of the grooviest, thrashiest, sludgiest American metal bands ever, who just cannot seem to make anything that leaves people unsatisfied. The riffs, Matt Pike's vocals, everything from High on Fire is still as glorious as ever. Cometh the Storm is an enormous thundering storm, and it's exactly what High on Fire knows how to deliver. Knocked Loose, you won't go before you're supposed to. Whether it's a Grammy nomination with Poppy or terrifying Jimmy Kimmel's audience, Knocked Loose had a tremendous year. You Won't Go Before You're Supposed to grew on me, and I have to say it's exactly what the hardcore group does best in total volume and aggression. And I get why so many people have embraced Knocked Loose this year. Thank you for checking this video out. You know how these videos work. Here are the top 10 best albums of 2024. Along with some big collaborations and a bonkers online variety show, Poppy released her most cohesive and complete album in Negative Spaces. Poppy is the unicorn of metal who really is capable of anything while being truly unique, and this album is the best proof of Poppy's unbridled creativity. You want that angry, aggressive side of Poppy? That opens the album. You want that hyper-pop, bubbly side of Poppy? That comes in Negative Spaces also. Unlike past albums, the songs feel much less chaotic and with countless transitions in the same song. The individual tracks are more coherent, for lack of a better word, and it helps big time. I think this may be Poppy's best album, or at least it's my personal favorite and most revisited. Not having transition whiplash in every track made me want to re-listen to each song. Never once do I feel anything is phoned in. Everything from the guitars to the polished synth work is well done, and Poppy proves she can work with anything she's given. 2024 was a stellar year for Poppy, and I hope that continues next year. Poppy's latest is the most accessible, so it's also something that if you've never been able to jump into Poppy and what she offers, Negative Spaces might be the easiest to take in. The variety show would be the opposite of that. Improbably Poppy is not for everyone. In fact, I'm not sure who it's for. It's intentionally weird. So it's on brand for Poppy. Job for a Cowboy returned to finish the job after 10 years. That Cowboy may have taken his sweet time, but the job was successfully completed. Moon Healer was the follow-up that I don't think many metal fans ever would have expected, but once we received it back in February, we were all praising the Teth Deck combo. That 10-year gap was their longest gap between albums by a long shot, and wow did they return in a big way. And just like 10 years ago, this is an onslaught to your ears, and you'll have to take a step back during a full playthrough to take it all in. Johnny Davies' bark is shocking through the runtime, so be prepared. As deep and fierce as the vocals gets, the instrument work is just as brilliant. One of the most cleanly played albums I've heard in 2024, and that's saying something considering the year metal had. The singles Forever Rot and Beyond the Chemical Doorway still hold up as some of the heaviest and well-executed metal songs of the year, and everything in between is just as fierce and polished. Technical death metal will never be for everyone, and I get that. If you're at least somewhat open to the death growl, you will more than enjoy Moon Healer though. It's vicious, it's replayable, and it's a great help if you want something angry sounding at the gym. Just don't play it on a speaker. You'll get kicked out of the YMCA for that. In 2023, Better Lovers had my favorite EP of the year with God Made Me an Animal. Now in 2024, the supergroup's debut Highly Irresponsible is one of my favorite albums of the year. It isn't just a one-time band between projects, the dream came true and Better Lovers are here to stay and dominate. I don't know how else to proclaim the gospel of Better Lovers at this point, because if you're not convinced after hearing Highly Irresponsible, you are a lost cause. This is that rare merging of bands that form an audio gut punch every time they're together. It's the best dose of chaotic glory you can find in heavy music right now, and everyone involved is as ridiculous as they are talented. The biggest problem is there are only 10 tracks across 35 minutes, including 2 tracks that are under 3 minutes. But when the biggest complaint is you're not getting enough of something good, it's a testament to how great this album is. A white horse covered in blood and future myopia, the entire first half of the album is such a shock to the system in the best way. The riffs, Greg's shout, it's all killer. It's fierce and combines all those elements of Dillinger and Every Time I Die and a gritty club venue about to get destroyed, all that presented in a hostile but still pleasant and lively package. It sounds furious, but you have a smile on your face when you listen. Better Lovers are the masters of mixed emotions, and I mean that as a compliment. A splash of variety from Fontaines D.C. that I was not expecting. Romance is the album that takes Fontaines to the verge of an arena rock sound and in turn makes Fontaines D.C. sound like a big deal again. There were many people swept up by Romance and are still enjoying the high from it. There are some albums that always help to improve your mood, and I think Romance did that for me every time I played it this year. Fontaines have been able to switch things up in the past after their debut and everything post-punk and indie, but with Romance, I feel they were able to execute all their ideas into a smooth presentation that's connecting and effervescent at times while being slow and dramatic at others. Bug, Starbuster, and the soft breezy In the Modern World were my specific go-tos from Romance. Fontaines were not afraid to play with effects and song structures, and I think that is what made Romance such a beloved album by many this year. The endless grooves on the album stick with you, and in a subgenre with so many people trying to make this exact style, Fontaines D.C. showed how it's done. On their 4th album, Fontaines D.C. have combined the good elements of Blur and 2000s Coldplay, while fusing that with their own style as well. So much of this album works as a captivating, energizing form of indie rock magnified into something bigger. The only problem? That album cover. I know some people like the warped meme style of it, but yikes. Album's still great though. In true Jack White fashion, we got a surprise release from a man who I'm convinced knows how to keep the spirit of no gimmick rock and roll going strong. No Name dropped in July, and this is by far the most I've enjoyed a Jack White album in a long time, possibly going all the way back to the White Stripes days. It's weird to think that Jack White has been doing the solo work for so long and it's been consistent, but in 2024 with a surprise album that he shined this bright. This was exactly that missing piece the rock scene needed in a big way this year. It's not just garage rock, it's too big sounding for anyone's garage. No Name is the new high standard for this style that Jack White already set himself. 13 tracks that are filled with hooks. It's not high-end polished production and post-mixing. It's a strong, well-layered mix with White sounding bold and clear. Song topics range from selling out in the business all the way to religious confusion and a nice message for the police officers also. Everything is dripping with attitude and charisma, and White is still performing like he's in his 20s. Everyone raves about Jack White and how great of a performer he is, and I think No Name should get a lot of time at his upcoming tours because all this music would work perfectly for a moving audience. If you still haven't heard No Name, play it. Play it loud. This is music that's well crafted with great writing and energy. You know, like rock and roll used to always have. I can talk about musicians creating an atmosphere and setting a mood for days, but it would be easier to just play Chelsea Wolfe's 2024 album. Wolfe has spent years walking the line between unnerving calm and dark anger. In She Reaches Out to She Reaches Out to She, Wolfe gives into the anger and in turn becomes a force of nature. This album is hypnotic. I say that as someone who has spent a lot of time with the album playing and being a nightly soundtrack in the first quarter of this year. Her soft singing that gets imperceivably louder with heavy distortion in her guitar, this album made February sound like the heap of October, and in turn, the rest of spring sound like a cold, dark autumn. Everything Turns Blue and House of Self-Undoing have that hypnotic attraction, and some of the lyrics are haunting. Everything is tinted dark, but it's never miserable or too bleak that it makes you want to stop. That constant pull to keep listening is comforting after a while, as if Wolfe is using subconscious bewitching to make sure you return to the cycle. I mean, if that's true, then it worked. Even with the endless distortion and thick mixing to make that mood and setting, Chelsea Wolfe sounds like she's in her natural environment. It's gothic without being pretentious or relying on gimmick or darkness, but rather naturally dark in a sonically gorgeous way. For a ridiculous analogy, have you ever seen Grumpy Bear? The Care Bear with the rain cloud? That Care Bear is still cuddly. That's this album. It was the members of the Song vs. Song podcast, Todd and Lena, that pointed out a DC-based punk band I had never heard of. It took one listen to the song Beethoven that made me jump in head first. After a short listening experience, even shorter than Better Lovers, I realized Pink Balloons was a special album. Ekko Astral has more punk spirit in 1 second than any phony punk-branded YouTube channel could ever contain. Take that as you will. The DC punk scene has always had a solid base, and Ekko Astral is a different style for punk even in DC and obviously around the world, but once you hear it, the charisma and tone is all addicting. You instantly want to come back to it all, even in the most ridiculous of moments. The bass, the percussion, the rhythms, the setup of each song before the attitude cuts loose, everything is immersive. Lyrically, Pink Balloons ranges from vicious to completely random. It takes massive talent to somehow bring in Molly Shannon as a lyric, and somehow still feel every bit as punk as the rest of the album, but Ekko Astral made it work. When I got to the mammoth track Devora, that's when I made the album a staple for me in 2024. The vibe of that underground club on the East Coast is instantly visible on first listen. The fuzz and distortion, the swagger and the vocal delivery makes this incredibly dynamic, and that punk hasn't seen something like this in quite a while, or at least not as executed as well as Ekko Astral has made it here. Tragedy can lead to great works of art. It's tragic that so many truly terrible events have happened to Nick Cave over the years, even recently, but somehow Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds found a way to push forward and create Wild God, and in turn make one of the best albums of 2024 with little sounding like it. It is the awful realization that you can be grateful for Wild God and love listening to it, but realize it has come after so many bad things for Nick Cave. But when you hear Wild God and his voice and how strong and commanding his performance is, you get that vibe of the man still proving to everyone he's alive and kicking. Wild God is definitely not as grief-soaked as the previous few albums with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and I feel that's what sets it apart so well in the discography. The instruments and orchestrated parts are all performed excellently. This album had many voices and instruments put to work, and the end result had everyone in sync. The music swells, the spoken word and singing is all made universal and relatable. That is a difficult thing to accomplish with something so specific in a Wild God's journey between doubt and having faith, but when you listen to Wild God and easily find a way to compare it to your own life, you'll realize how well written everything is. Outside of music, 2024 was rough for many people. This is an album that might be able to help you look up at something a bit brighter, and it comes from Nick Cave of all people, a man known for his darkness. Wild God is proof of just how amazing this man is. I have been aware of Blood Incantation for years. This is a band that's well known for different styles of metal and have lived on the road supporting other bands for roughly a decade. It's not an exaggeration that Absolute Elsewhere is the best album they've ever made, and there is little out there in metal even similar. This is the proggy death metal science fiction space soundtrack that scratched such a perfect itch that it's going to be difficult to describe to everyone who hasn't heard it. Take the best space fights from Star Trek and Star Wars or a film or episode and make that soundtrack obliterating metal at times, but also have a thick groove and cohesive flow and the death growls. And then you have Absolute Elsewhere. I promise that's accurate. Many metal fans are going to have this album on their year-end list. An album of stargates and messages, which is how the tracks are broken down. There are riffs and wailing guitars for days. The death growl from Paul echoes and reverberates into your bones. Absolute Elsewhere is how you get lost in listening to an album, as it's a giant black hole time warp. I remember thinking earlier this year when I first listened, if the idea of being in space has ever terrified you, Then listen to Absolute Elsewhere. Space will still be terrifying, but the soundtrack will make it sound huge and amazing. The big appeal is that it's death metal that is not screaming in intensity the entire runtime. Far from it. Some of the quieter moments along with the guitar tracks make the journey chilling. It's the perfect listening experience for that type of sci-fi journey and for heavy music lovers. I love this album. I hope to hear it on vinyl soon, and I would also like to recommend listening to it while reading a good sci-fi book series like the Red Rising Saga or something more comical like Dungeon Crawler Carl. I read book 1 of that series while listening to Absolute Elsewhere, and it was great, both the album and book. Thank you so much to the Metal Meltdown for pointing out this album also. Check his channel out in the YouTube description below. If you haven't already, please hit the like button on this video if you've enjoyed it so far. It does help a ton to push this video out to new viewers on the homepage. Also subscribe so you can see what I have coming up in January. Alright, here's my favorite album of 2024. Maybe it's a 16-year absence that made the heart grow fonder. Maybe it's a band like The Cure living up to the impossibly high standards that was already established by themselves decades previous. Regardless of the surrounding circumstances, Songs of a Lost World prove that The Cure will forever be in a league of their own. Only 8 songs, running just under 50 minutes. In 8 tracks, The Cure used every second to make the thickest, sonically rich, while still dark and moody tone I've heard in a long time. And The Cure did that with singing and lyrics that were not all non-stop misery. This is in no way a truly miserable album, but in fact, it's peaceful while still gripping your attention. Robert Smith's voice fits the tone and music like a glove, and it's not an album filled with singing. A strong amount of the 50 minutes is just the band creating that dense mood in each track. And Nothing Is Forever, I Can Never Say Goodbye, the opener alone, each song over 6 minutes that highlights Smith's signature sound while giving ample time to the instrument work. It's difficult to be witty and entertaining and funny in an over-the-top way about Songs of a Lost World because you just want people to experience the album and hope others experience the album in a strong way as well. Which is a big ask considering this is the streaming age and most people listen to music in short bursts at a time and rarely in a full album playthrough. But Songs of a Lost World really needs that full playthrough experience. All of Songs of a Lost World was written by Robert Smith. At age 65, that man still has more talent and vision than most rock and alternative musicians in their 20s combined. That's not an exaggeration either. Whether live or in studio, Robert Smith is still crushing it along with The Cure. I would recommend Songs of a Lost World to anyone. That was the final deciding factor for it being my number 1. Absolute Elsewhere is for a smaller audience in Death and Prog. Nick Cave is even for a specific audience, really. What The Cure made in 2024 is something that everyone can get behind. The 14th album from The Cure stands out on its own as an album and is another feather in The Cure's massive hat that no one else can wear. In 2024, we needed something big like this from a band like The Cure, and it all lined up perfectly.
This love is a fragile thing, nothing you can do.
So I pose the question for you, and I mean it when I ask, what was your favorite album of 2024? I want to go through the comments and see what people loved this year because there was so much good music, and this is the right time for everyone to call out what they loved. In case you missed it, you can check out what I thought was the worst of 2024 in the video description if you're curious. Mainly, I just hope you found something on this video worth checking out, and I especially hope you agree that it's great. The internet can be used to share good news and talk about positive things. Promise it's possible. Finally, here's a cat. We would like to thank you all for checking out the channel over the past year. Pearl and I. We'd also like to thank Brandon Bruce, Chris Stoneman, Hinsong Variations, and Dom Noble for their support on Patreon. It's helped out a ton. Pearl, you have anything to say? He just told me he wants a raise for being his editing assistant. Well, we'll work on that, buddy. We'll work on that.